Yeah, they have to. Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, the last and important part of our conference is the keynote address by Congressman Dan Burton. I had the pleasure to testify before his Subcommittee on Europe and Eurasia, a couple of times, and Congressman who spent 15 terms as a U.S. State Representative from Indiana's 5th Congressional District, is an expert on international affairs, U.S. foreign policy, and defense. When Congressman Burton assumed the chairmanship of the House Committee on Government Reform and Oversight in the 105th Congress, he was the first Indiana Republican to chair a full House committee in more than 60 years. The Committee on Oversight and Government Reform is the main investigative committee of the U.S. House. Mr. Burton also served as chairman of, or a ranking Republican member of all foreign affairs subcommittees and served as chairman of Subcommittee on Europe and Eurasia, as I said. The committee had a broad authority on such issues as export control, non-proliferation of nuclear technology, nuclear hardware, international conferences and congresses, international education, etc., etc. Mr. Burton also had extensive international travel that allowed him to get first-hand knowledge with a number of burning global issues, including the issue at hand today, which is radical Islam and threat of it to South Caucasus. Congressman Burton received multiple honorary doctoral degrees from Capital University, Indiana Wesleyan University, and a degree in political science from Graduate School of Dongguk University in Republic of South Korea. He is a proud veteran of armed forces, serving in the U.S. Army and Army Reserve, and before election to U.S. Congress, Mr. Burton held offices in Indiana State Senate, the Indiana House of Representatives, and was also a successful businessman. He's a former president of Volunteers for America and former president of Indiana Christian Benevolent Association. Let's give us a hand for Congressman Dan Burton.
You'll have to forgive me. I thought I was coming here today to talk about the government shutdown. But I guess I'll have to deviate from my script and talk about some foreign policy issues. I've been on the Foreign Affairs Committee for 30 years, and as was just said, I've served on every subcommittee or been chairman of every subcommittee around the world. My biggest concern right now is our attitude towards radical Islam and how we're going to deal with it. And I believe sometimes our leaders are a little bit either inexperienced or naive in how they decide to do that. The first thing I'd like to do, rather than talk about the Caucasus, is to talk a little bit about some things that has preceded that over the last year or so, 2 years. Libya was a country that was governed by a tyrant, one who at one time we bombed because of the threats that he posed to the free world and to the United States and our interests. After Ronald Reagan bombed Libya, Gaddafi changed his attitude. He was still a tyrant in his country, but he was no threat, as far as I could see, beyond Libya. Nevertheless, when there were problems that raised their head in Benghazi, he decided he was going to do something about it, and the President of France and the President of the United States decided it was in our interest and in humanitarian interest to go in there and to depose him, to get him out of there. Well, we did. And after he left, we all know what happened. The country is in chaos. We have radical elements that are running large parts of the country, and there's no end to it in sight. We went into Egypt, the president did, and he made some statements about democracy and freedom. And the president of Egypt was not the kind of guy you'd like to go to school with or church with on Sunday. He was a bad guy. But nevertheless, he had supported the Camp David peace accords, and there was no threat by him in the Middle East. He was a tyrant, and there was a threat to his country because of his tyrannical attitudes. But we led the opposition, so to speak, with our speeches and our comments, and he was overthrown. And we ended up with the Muslim Brotherhood taking over the country. And after the Muslim Brotherhood has been replaced by the military junta over there, we have chaos once again. The point I want to make right at the outset is it's very important that we look at where we're going and do a lot of thinking before we step in and try to make major changes in various parts of the world, not only because of how it'll affect the region, but how it will affect the United States and our interests. And so now we come to Syria. And the President of the United States and many of our allies have said that we had to do something about Assad to get him out of there. And what happened? We ended up with Mr. Putin taking the initiative, making the United States look bad, and the problem continues to exist. We need to be very concerned and careful about how we conduct foreign policy. We need to think long-term, long-range about where we're going and what the ramifications are of our decisions. And I don't think we've been doing that, maybe because of inexperience, maybe there are other reasons, I don't know. But now we come to Iran, and we come to the expansion of radical Islam in various parts of the world. We see it in Libya, we see it in Egypt, we see it in parts of Syria right now, in the people that are opposing Assad. And we seem to not know what we're going to do next. Now, we have friends in the world whom we should be supporting and whom we should count on and whom we should work with to deter the expansion of radical Islam and terrorism. But it seems as though we've made mistake after mistake after mistake. Now, when we talk about the Caucasus, we talk about friends that we have there that we have been overlooking for some time. Azerbaijan is one of those friends that we have not been paying a great deal of attention to. As a matter of fact, when Mr. Weitz spoke before our committee, he read something that I thought was very relevant for this conversation we're having today. And it was a quote by Professor Blank of the U.S. Army War College, and he wrote, "The administration has hitherto treated South Caucasus as an afterthought or as an overflight issue on the road to Afghanistan. Such neglect is dangerous and misconceived. The mounting threats in the Middle East, Iran, and the Caucasus show how vital it is that the United States strengthen pro-Western regimes. For if we continue to neglect the Caucasus, this neglect will quickly become malign, and malign neglect invariably generates not only instability, but also protracted violence." And as I said before, we've already seen that in places where we have been involved and where we haven't made the proper decisions, in my opinion. And I'm sure there are those of you who are listening and watching that may disagree with some of my statements, and I'll be happy to respond to those later on in my talk. Iran right now has a new president, and Rouhani has made some very fine comments at the United Nations, and he's written some op-eds that are very highly regarded and well received by people in the free world. As a matter of fact, Great Britain has reached out to him. The President of the United States has reached out to him, and there's been indications that an era of good feeling may be about to evolve. But once again, we need to look down the road and think about where we're going, like we didn't do in Libya, like we didn't do in Egypt, and look at what the facts are today. Prior to World War II, Lord Chamberlain was so anxious to make sure that we didn't have a major conflagration, he was willing to go to Munich, meet with Adolf Hitler, and sign an agreement on Hitler's terms. As a result of that agreement and him coming back, raising the agreement and say peace in our times, we ended up with 50 million people being killed. 50 million. That's a low number. Some people think it was much higher than that. And we had a conflagration that you could not imagine. Iran is a nuclear threat. Ahmadinejad continually talked about his desire to destroy not only Israel, but the great Satan, the United States, and they've been working on an ICBM system as well as a nuclear weapons system. And people say, maybe now that we have a new president over there, that we can trust him, we can work with him, and possibly we'll be able to take them back away from their nuclear development program. Now let me just read to you a few things about Mr. Rouhani. Mr. Rouhani was one of the right-hand men of the spiritual leader of Iran right now, who is no friend of the West and no friend of Israel. And he was also one of the right-hand men of the Ayatollah Khomeini. And you do not get that kind of a position of leadership unless you're one that they can trust and one that they think will continue to carry out their goals and objectives for Iran in the world. They continue today to run their centrifuges. They have thousands of centrifuges creating weapons-grade uranium, and it's going on as we speak. To make a nuclear weapon, it takes 250 kilograms of 20% enriched uranium to make a nuclear bomb. They already have, according to the Atomic Energy Commission and other experts, 186 kilograms of 20% enriched uranium, which means they're only 60 kilograms short of making their first nuclear weapon today. And the centrifuges run as we speak. We need to approach our negotiations with the new president of Iran in a very careful way. And the first thing we have to demand, the free world I'm talking about, not just the United States, is that they stop their nuclear weapons program, their nuclear development program immediately, and that we have verifiable ways of making absolutely sure that the perfection of uranium, weapons-grade uranium, is being stopped. And that has not even been discussed. And Great Britain is now talking about reaching out to them and possibly even opening an embassy or a consulate in Great Britain and in Tehran. Have we not learned anything? Neville Chamberlain learned later, after he was removed from the leadership of Great Britain, when 50 million people died. President Clinton negotiated with the leadership in North Korea, and they promised they were going to stop their nuclear development program. They have nuclear weapons today. They have them today. And they are a threat not only to that region, but they're developing ICBMs as well, and they're a threat to the free world. Tehran has said time and again under the previous president, Ahmadinejad, that they want to destroy the great Satan as well as the little Satan. At the United Nations just recently, Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, after the statements made by Rouhani, he explained very carefully and very clearly the threat that they pose if we lower our guard. And he said very clearly that if Israel has to go it alone in order to protect them and their citizens, they will do it. And I'm confident, after having known him for a number of years, that will happen. Now you say, well, that's one thing that we have to deal with. And we will deal with it. Our leadership is pretty smart, and so are the British leaders. And they're going to make sure that the nuclear weapons program and the expansion program of Iran is something that we can talk them out of doing. I do not believe it, not for a minute. I wrote an op-ed in the Washington Times the last couple of weeks. I hope you'll get a chance to read it. because it spells out very clearly the reasons why I think we're making a mistake in going down the same road we went down to prior to World War II, the same road we went down to under the Clinton administration when we started negotiating with North Korea, and we're doing it again and again. Will we ever listen? Will we ever learn from the mistakes we've made in the past? We are now in the nuclear age. If we make a mistake now, it's not something that's going to be of small potatoes. It's going to be a major problem. We could have a conflagration that would possibly not only involve the Middle East and other parts of the world, including us, but it could possibly dwarf what happened in World War II. We must not be naive. Now let's look at the Caucasus. Iran is trying to undermine the government of Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan may not be a perfect government, but they are a democratic government. They had an election yesterday. You may not like everything that happened or the poll results or the statements that are made, but the fact is they are an ally of the United States. They have democratic elections, and they are not in the sphere of Iran. But Iran is trying to do everything they can to undermine that government. I was just over there recently. I was in a number of the countries. As a matter of fact, as chairman of Europe and Eurasia, I was in 18 countries, including the Caucasus, over the last year and a half. And prior to that, I was ranking Republican on the Middle East. And I believe right now that we need to pay attention and be involved immediately in the Caucasus with our friends, in particular Azerbaijan. And Iran knows that, and that's why Iran is trying to do everything they can to undermine that government. And they're doing it with the support of Russia. President Putin has said time and again that he thought one of the biggest mistakes the Soviet Union ever made was the dissolution of that institution. And he wants to rebuild it. And he's doing it. He's doing it right now, and he's working with countries like Iran, with whom they really don't have a lot in common except they have mutual goals. And Azerbaijan is one of those countries that Putin is interested in, as well as Iran. And then you go to the Persian Gulf. And I've written about this and talked about this in the past as well. You say, well, why are you deviating from the Caucasus? Because that's a topic of discussion today. It's because the entire region is of concern. If you look at a map of Iran, you'll see it's not just the Caucasus, but it's the Persian Gulf and all the countries surrounding Iran that are in jeopardy in one way or another. And we need to be concerned about that. I was in Manama recently, in Bahrain, and there's no question that Iran is sending people into that country and working with a radical Ayatollah in that country to undermine that government. Now, you may not agree with everything that Bahrain's doing. It's a monarchy, and you may not agree with some of the political attitudes of that country. They do have a legislative branch, and they are moving and trying to accommodate some of the more dissident elements in that country, but nevertheless, that is a monarchy. But they are a friend of the United States. We have the Fifth Fleet there, and we are one of the biggest deterrents, with the Fifth Fleet being there, along with Bahrain, to the expansionist policy of Iran. Iran is right across the Persian Gulf from Bahrain. They are right next door to Azerbaijan, and they are trying to use their influence and their minions and their terrorists and their undercover agents to undermine those governments as well as others. The point I want to make today in my brief remarks is that it's important for the United States not to look at the world the way we want it to be, but to look at the world the way it is. Iran and the radicals in Iran and the terrorists that they support in other parts of the world are a threat not only to that region, but to us as well. Why in the world would Iran be developing an ICBM? Well, they say it's for their space program because they want to put satellites in space. You kidding me? They want to intimidate the West. And they're building a nuclear weapon. If they wanted to attack Israel, they don't need an ICBM. What do they want an ICBM for? It's to be a threat to us. They want to do the same thing that North Korea has been doing by rattling sabers all the time and trying to put pressure on the West to accede to their wishes. These are things that we have to look at. We have to look at the world the way it is and not the way we want it to be. And we have to approach enemies, and Iran is an enemy, we have to approach them with great trepidation. We have to make sure, if we're going to talk to them, that we're getting something very strong in return. And what is that? Verifiable destruction of their nuclear weapons development program. And there's been no indication of that. And as I said when I started my remarks, the centrifuges are running right now. They have 186 kilograms of nuclear weapons material, and they only need 250 to have a nuclear weapon. And we don't know how long that's going to take. A few years ago, they only had a few hundred centrifuges. Now they have thousands, and they're running them right now. One of my friends in politics years ago, when I first entered politics, he said, when you go up and talk to your enemies in politics, and you know the media's watching, and you know the world's watching, smile, shake hands with them. And if you're going to stick a knife in them, stick it behind their back so nobody will see it. Now, I never did that. But the fact of the matter is just as true in the world theater as it is in politics. You can't take people at their word, especially if they're an enemy. You have to make sure what they say is in solid concrete. And I see the world reaching out right now, the United States of America, Great Britain, and other allies of ours, rushing to embrace the new president of Iran without any real indications that things have changed other than an editorial that was in the New York Times and a speech that he made before the United Nations. We have friends that are in jeopardy right now. The two I cited earlier are two examples. Azerbaijan is a friend. They supported us with sanctions against Iran. They've supported us in Afghanistan. They've supported us in getting supplies into our troops. Bahrain has been a friend and an ally, and they supported us. And yet right now, we're not really doing anything to give them the support that they need so that they can dissuade and stop the radical elements in that area of the world from trying to overthrow and undermine their governments. President Aliyev, I've had the opportunity to meet with him and his ambassador. I don't know if his ambassador is here today or not. I met with him recently. But they're very concerned about what's happening, and they want the relationship with the United States and the West to grow and be stronger. And it's in our interest that that take place. We cannot allow what I read before to continue. Let me read this one more time because I think it's important. Professor Blank of the U.S. Army War College said, and Mr. Cohen brought this before our committee. He said, the administration has hitherto treated the South Caucasus as an afterthought. That they're right next to Iran. They border Iran. The South Caucasus as an afterthought or as an overflight issue on the road to Afghanistan. Such neglect is dangerous and misconceived. The mounting threats in the Middle East, Iran, and the Caucasus show how vital it is that the U.S. strengthen pro-Western regimes, for if we continue to neglect the Caucasus and the others I talked about, this neglect will quickly become malign, and malign neglect invariably generates not only instability, but also protracted violence. I hope we'll all think about that. You folks who are here in this audience today and who may be watching on television, you're leaders, you're people who are really concerned. Most people in the country right now are worried about the government shutdown, and foreign policy is an issue that they're only concerned about when it immediately hits them or is in the headlines. Or the foreign aid bills up and they don't think we ought to be giving money to other countries. But you folks are the ones who pay attention to what's going on. And you're the policy makers. And you're the people who talk to our leaders in the Congress and in the administration. And you need to carry the message. We all need to carry the message to be very careful and concerned about how we deal with the enemies of the free world. Radical Islam, supported by Iran and others, is something that we must be concerned about and are worried about every single day. And people, because the memory of the United States and the people of this country is very short. 9/11 came and we were all concerned about it, and we got involved in Afghanistan and we did all that. But it wanes. But the terrorists do not wane. They do not stop. They continue to push toward their goals. And their goals are world control, world domination, and a radical view of Islam for everybody that doesn't believe. And we have to be aware of that, and we have to deal with the snake's head. The snake's head. I see he's moving, so I'm about ready to shut up. The snake's head, as far as I'm concerned right now, is Iran. And before we start negotiating with Iran, we'd better damn well be sure we know what we're doing and make sure that we can verify they're stopping their nuclear development program, and we can be sure that it's happened. And that they have no more designs on Israel, on Azerbaijan, on our friends in the Gulf like Bahrain, and especially not the United States of America. They sure as hell don't need an ICBM. And with that, I'll answer any questions you might have.
Well, thank you, sir, for bringing some moral clarity here. We will take several questions. Please make these questions. Introduce yourself, keep it short, make it a question, and the congressman will be happy to answer. Let's start with you.
Thank you, Congressman. Kate Nahapetian with the Armenian National Committee of America.
Uh-huh.
After you retired from Congress, you joined an Azerbaijani group called the Azerbaijan American Alliance.
Uh-huh.
That was started by the Azerbaijani transportation minister's son. I was wondering if you could talk more about, your work in this Azerbaijani group.
My concern when I was asked to work with that organization was to make sure that the things I just talked about were realized. The Caucasus is in a very sensitive area of the world, as is Armenia. And I think it's real important that we pay attention to what's going on there, especially with Iran having designs in that area. And how we deal with them is extremely important. So when they asked me if I would be interested in working with them, I said yes, I would.
Gentleman right here.
Michael Kurtzig, formerly from the Department of Agriculture. I just want to reiterate what you said, and that is to quote Hegel, that we learn from history that we don't
Chuck
learn
Hagel
from history.
or the other?
Not Chuck Hagel. It's a good one, the philosopher. We learn from history that we don't learn from
Carl
history.
Friedrich.
But what I wanted to ask you, this morning the government announced that they would cut off some military aid to Egypt. Is that a mistake? Is that in the same way that we're going down with our influence in the region?
That is an extremely difficult question. The one thing that I think is important in that region of the world is stability. When the Muslim Brotherhood took over and their radical views, especially in their new constitution, started to prevail, it became apparent to me that that was something that the free world could not live with. This is my view. You may not agree. And my concern was, how do you change that? Because it was a democratically elected government. The same thing is true of what happened in the West Bank when Hamas won. Now, Hamas is a radical terrorist organization, but they won the election. The Muslim Brotherhood won the election. And so you have to say to yourself, is it always in the best interest of the world and in freedom and the things that we believe in for radical elements to take control of a government? And many times they can do that with a minority being very active. And so when you say, should we be supporting the military in Egypt, I think under the circumstances, and this is my view, I think it's important that with restrictions and with conditions and with input from the United States while they're moving toward a more quote-unquote democratic government, that we support that institution so that they can provide stability. Now, when Mubarak was president, there were horrible things that happened and people were killed. After the Muslim Brotherhood took over, the number of killings and murders and horrible atrocities that took place went up, and now they're even worse. This once again makes my point. Before we go down the road to help trying to change governments, we'd better darn well look down the road and make sure we're doing the right thing. And I'm talking about, once again, Libya as well as Egypt. So do I think we should be giving them some support? I think so, with limitations.
Thank you, sir. There's a gentleman, yes, in a blue shirt. No. Yep.
Good afternoon, Mr. Congressman. My name is Scott Morgan. I'm with Red Eagle Enterprises. I have a couple of quick questions. First, what's your assessment of the status of U.S. forces currently in the Persian Gulf region? Secondly, regarding Bahrain, to divulge from a little bit, regarding the human rights climate, what is your view of that situation? And then lastly, the last question, going back to the
This
region.
is 3 questions, sir.
I'm sorry, I'm using Washington math.
Right.
The last question is regarding the triangle, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. What was your assessment on how things are going there? We know Azerbaijan had the elections yesterday. How stable are they?
Okay, well, let me start with the last one. First of all, I met with Saakashvili, who's the president of, I'm sorry?
Georgia.
Of Georgia, yeah, I knew that. Of Georgia. And he, of course, is going to be out of office and very well might be arrested by the new leader after his term of office expires. I hope that's not the question, after his term expires. I hope that's not the case. My concern in Georgia is Russia's influence. They've already invaded and taken part of the country. I think the new leader, I have not met him, but I know that he had strong business interests in Russia. I have a sneaking suspicion that he and Putin aren't diametrically opposed to one another. And so I am concerned about where Georgia is going to be going as far as the expansionist policy of Russia is concerned. Putin wants to rebuild piece by piece the old Soviet Union. And he's doing it. And he's doing it with the help of others, including Iran. And so we need to be concerned about that. Regarding the forces that we have in the Persian Gulf, the Fifth Fleet is there. We have great leadership in the Fifth Fleet. I've met with the commander over there. And I think we're in pretty good shape. Regarding the overall strength of the United States military, it's not where it should be. We have cut back in our military expenses in a very troubled world at a time when we really need to be prepared for almost anything. How much should we be spending on defense? Whether or not some of the cuts that have been authorized and taken place, whether or not they're justified, I'm not in a position to give you that answer. But I do know that if we ever needed a strong military, we need it now. Not that we want war, but as Ronald Reagan said, the best way to stay out of war is to be so strong that you're not going to have to worry about it. Peace through strength, I think is what they called it. And what was the third part of your question?
About your assessment of the internal climate within Bahrain.
Bahrain, I met with the opposition in my office in Washington last year. I met with the people in the government, as well as some people in the royal family. And there's no question that there are problems, and there are some legitimate problems. The government of Bahrain has reached out to the opposition and sat down and wanted to sit down with them on a number of occasions to try to work out some of the problems that they have and to come to some solutions. The Ayatollah, I can't remember his name right now, Khomeini, I think is his name. The Ayatollah over there has threatened some of the people who are willing to sit down with the royal family and the government to try to work out their differences through the negotiation process. And as a result, problems continue to go on. I see you shaking your head, so maybe you don't agree with me. But nevertheless, I've been there. I've talked to both sides. There are problems. I think they can be worked out. But from a geopolitical standpoint, Bahrain is very important to our interests in the world and in the in the Persian Gulf area. Right across, 30, 40 miles across the Persian Gulf is Iran. And they're trying to undermine not only that government, but these other governments I alluded to earlier. And so we can't turn our back on them. Plus, we have the Fifth Fleet there, and if we don't have it there, I don't know how we're going to protect the Persian Gulf. If the Straits of Hormuz are closed, or the Suez Canal is closed, we get probably 30-some% of our energy, which we ought to try to get away from that part of the world. And we certainly don't need that to happen, because if that happens, we will suffer an economic problem that you'll not believe. Anybody else? Okay. There's a gentleman back there.
Yep.
Rafi from Graduate of University of Delaware. My question is about, do you have any specific, very thorough policy recommendation to the Obama administration how to curb the influence of Iran, and also the nuclear threats if they decide not to negotiate? I mean, I'm talking about Rouhani's administration. If they want to prolong the time, if they decide it's just a game, they want to play with game with the United States. Do you have any radical measures? Let's say war with waging war with Iran.
I will give you my prognostication, and I hope nobody's hair starts standing on end. But I truly believe that the timidity of the Western powers toward Iran and their determination to try to work out a rapprochement with Iran will lead to a nuclear weapons program over there that will not be stopped. And if that happens, they will have a nuclear weapon like Korea does, and they'll have a delivery system of an international capacity, as well. Now, if that starts to happen, I believe that the chance for a major conflagration is very real, because I know Bibi Netanyahu. I've known him for years. I've had him before my committee. And if he's prime minister of Israel, he is not going to allow the nation of Israel to be endangered by a nuclear Iran. And they will do whatever is necessary to stop that from happening. Now, if that happens, only the good Lord knows what will happen as a result. We could end up with a confrontation over there involving the United States, Western powers, because of the energy that comes out of that part of the world. That's why it's important that when we negotiate or talk to these people, we make sure we do it with a jaundiced eye. Don't say to Rouhani, you know, we want to work with you. We know you're a nice guy. You make nice statements. You smile big, and your statement at the UN was great, and we want to work. None of that. We have to be very hardcore, just like Ronald Reagan said to Gorbachev, trust but verify. Make sure we verify everything that they say they're going to do. Because we didn't with Korea, and they have nuclear weapons and ICBMs. Now, do we want Iran to have that? I think not. Thank you all very much. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Brenda Schaefer from Georgetown University, and I had the pleasure also of testifying at your committee on Iran and the South Caucasus, actually, during one of your last
Nice seeing you
hearings
again.
in office. Nice to see you. Can you explain to us why successive U.S. administrations, we saw this even during the Khatami period and even during Ahmadinejad period and Rouhani period in Iran, relate to the office of the presidency in Iran, when clearly in the decision-making structure in Iran, the spiritual leader is the leader of Iran, sets the policies. Elections in Iran, if we have criticism about a number of places about elections or places, not only are they not monitored, but the candidates are selected by a select committee in Iran. Why do successive U.S. administrations take into account so much what the president says when essentially it's not much more than the royal family in the UK or some sort of symbolic position?
There is a desire among leaders in the free world to believe the best and try to ignore the worst, in my view. And as I said at the outset, we can't look at the world the way we want it to be. We have to look at it the way it is. You can't trust people who will lie to you and will do things that are not in your interest. And so I think that the naivete of the Western powers has been prevalent, not just through Democrat administrations, but Republicans as well. The last president I thought that had the right attitude and common sense was a guy I liked a lot and was kind of a friend of mine. His name Ronald Reagan. And I wish we had him back today because I don't think he would be handling things the way they are today. This is not I'm not criticizing President Obama for a lot of things. I probably would like to. But as far as foreign policy is concerned, I think it's more being naive than anything else. You can't trust these people unless you can really verify what's going on. And it seems to me we're rushing to judgment right now. I mean, when Great Britain is talking about opening up a consulate with Iran, I mean, this is nuts. You just don't do that. And if you don't believe it, look at history. Look at Neville Chamberlain. Look at Bill Clinton with North Korea. I mean, just don't do it. Anything else?
I think that we pretty much, well, there's a gentleman who really is eager to ask probably the last question. Please keep it short.
Very short.
Yeah.
Like the before. We talk about Iran being able to make a atomic bomb. Imagine that they have, and they attack Israel with that one bomb that they have. What is going to happen the next 24 hours in the world?
Well, first of all, I think the premise of your question is not accurate. I think that if they develop a nuclear weapon, I know a little bit about the Mossad, like I know a little bit as they're being in the Foreign Affairs Committee about the KGB and CIA and the FBI. And I am confident that the Mossad knows what's going on in Iran right now. And I believe that if Iran develops a nuclear weapon, Israel will move either unilaterally or with the support of the West.
Okay, so follow-up question. Netanyahu orders attack to Iran. What happens the next 24 hours?
You mean if there was a nuclear attack on Israel?
Netanyahu, because of the information that gets from Mossad or
These are
others,
hypotheticals.
decides to attack Iran. What happens the next 24 hours?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think the case would have to be made very strongly that it was absolutely necessary, and that would then be incumbent upon the government of Israel to prove, and I think that they would probably be willing to do that, prove categorically that the attack sites that they hit were in fact producing nuclear weapons. And with that, thank you all for being so patient. I really appreciate it.
I would like to say a few words in conclusion. I, first of all, would like to thank Richard Weitz and the staff of the Hudson Institute for preparing this conference. I know how much work it takes to prepare this and other conferences. Thank you all very, very much. This is a time for American leadership, even despite the budgetary constraints, despite of the mounting debt. We are indeed, as Madeleine Albright said, an indispensable power. There's nobody else who can do the job. And we're facing the world in which Sunni states or actors in Sunni states in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere, are supporting the spread of Salafi ideology that tolerates and encourages terrorism. This is the world in which the Islamic Republic of Iran not only is building a nuclear weapon and means of delivery, but also supported again and again terrorist attacks, including in South Caucasus as well as in the other parts of the world. And if there is going to be a breakthrough, and I'm being moderately pessimistic about that, Iran will need to cease being a threat to its neighbors near and far. It needs to stop its nuclear program and make it transparent to the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, under the additional protocols. There are very specific technical issues that will need to apply to that program, just as our friends in the Gulf would need to stop supporting terrorists and spreading ideology that breeds terrorism. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you again and would invite my colleague Richard Weitz of the Hudson Institute to say some concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, it's going to be very simple since the time is over. So I want to, first of all, thank all the speakers and panelists who've been contributing to the dialogue. I want to particularly thank the Hudson staff, since this would not have been possible, with poor Perry in the back there doing all the filming, audio, and trying to run everything else. And then my wonderful interns who were kind enough to come in really early this morning, despite the weather, to help me set up. And I want to, of course, thank Ariel for being a great partner in this effort, and his colleague Natalie, who's sitting in the back, who likes to keep a low profile. Sorry, sitting on the side there, but it was my partner doing a lot of the operational work. And I want to thank the audience too. As I said, when I walked out, if I had not been running this conference, I wouldn't have come in. I would have just watched it on the web. So I much appreciate your coming. I hope it was worthwhile, and I look forward to seeing you again, Hudson. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Let me give you my
Good
card.
to see you again. It's good seeing you again, and I'm sorry I didn't mention that you did give such great testimony.
We actually got great partnership.